Ciao, and welcome to Immersion Travel Italy. I'm Caterina Ferrara, author of the Travel Italy book series and your host. This podcast is about experiencing Italy beyond the checklist, slowing down, paying attention, and understanding places not for what we see, but for why they matter. We are continuing our journey through the regional capitals of Italy, moving region by region from north to south, discovering not just places on a map, but layers of history, culture, faith, architecture, and everyday life that makes each region distinct. We began in the north. We stood beneath the arcades of Turin, once the capital of the kingdom that would unify Italy. We explored the maritime and layered identity of Genoa. We walked Renaissance Florence. We experienced the academic legacy of Bologna. We visited the lake regions of Lombardy and the dramatic north of Italy. We descended into Campania and Naples, where Greek foundations, Roman wealth, Norman rule, Spanish power, and Bourbon ambition still shape the streets. And now we move deeper south. Today we begin our exploration of Basilicata. This is episode 17 in the series. Basilicata is the region squeezed between Puglia to the east, Campania to the west, and Calabria to the south. It reaches the Ionian Sea along the southeastern coastline, and on the opposite side touches a small stretch of the Tyrrhenian near Maratea. Basilicata is quieter than its neighbors, less theatrical, more rugged, more introspective. It's a land of mountains and ravines, of ancient cave dwellings and ridge-top cities, of agricultural roots and deep faith foundations. It's home to one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, Matera, whose stone Sassis became globally recognized through film and restoration. And it's governed from one of Italy's highest regional capitals, Potenza, a city that rises along the spine of the Lucanian Apennines. This is a region that's somewhat isolated due to migration, but also enduring. Today we'll trace Basilicata's history from the Magna Graecia, or Greater Greece, through Roman roads, medieval kingdoms, and Bourbon rule, through poverty and emigration, and to its modern renewal. We'll stop in Potenza, the heart of the region, to understand how this mountain capital fits into Basilicata's identity. Because Italy is never one story, it's many, and Basilicata may be one of its most revealing. Let's begin. To understand this region, we need to talk about its land. Mountains rise in long, undulating ridges. Ravines cut deep into limestone. Villages perch on heights that feel defensive, almost cautious. This geography is not dramatic in a theatrical way of the Amalfi Coast. It's quieter. The Apennines form the backbone of the region, and for centuries they shaped how people lived, traveled, and survived. Long before Italy was Italy, the region was known as Lucania. The people who lived here, the Lucani, were mountain tribes, independent, tough, resistant. They were shaped by terrain, elevation, and endurance. Then the Greeks arrived along the Ionian coast. They founded colonies as part of Greater Greece, and one of the most important is Metaponto. This was not a minor settlement. It was a prosperous, agricultural, and intellectually significant town. Pythagoras himself is believed to have spent time there. Even today, the Temple of Hera stands alone in the fields, columns rising against the sky and wind, a reminder that Basilicata once participated in the great Greek experiment of southern Italy. When Rome expanded southward, Lucania became part of the Republic and later the Empire. Under Roman rule, Basilicata remained primarily rural. It was connected by roads, villas dotted the countryside. Agriculture sustained the region, but it was never Rome's political or cultural center. After the fall of Rome, Basilicata passed between Byzantine and Lombard control before the Normans arrived in the 11th century. Under Norman rule, southern Italy unified under what would become the Kingdom of Sicily and later the Kingdom of Naples. Castles rose on the hilltops. Feudal systems shaped daily life. Monasteries preserved faith and learning. But again, Basilicata was not Naples. It's not Palermo. It's not a port city thriving on Mediterranean trade. It's land, fortified towns, and agricultural communities. By the 1500s onward, Spanish control reshaped southern Italy following Bourbon rule. Large landowners dominated vast stretches of farmland. Peasants worked hard in the mountain soil. Infrastructure lagged behind the more prosperous north. While Naples flourished as a royal capital, Basilicata remained economically fragile. When Italy unified in 1861, hopes were high. But unification did not immediately solve the South's problems. In many ways, the economic divide between the North and the South deepened, as we've heard in both the Puglia and Campania episodes. Basilicata became emblematic of what is called the Southern Question. Poverty intensified, opportunities were scarce, and people left. From the late 19th century to the early 20th century, thousands emigrated away. They boarded ships for the United States, Argentina, and other parts of Europe. Entire villages lost their young men. Basilicata became a land of departure. World War II brought a different kind of disruption. Southern Italy became a critical theater after the Allied invasion in 1943. Although Basilicata was not bombed as heavily as major cities like Naples, military movement and instability touched the region. Infrastructure strained under wartime pressure. Food shortages worsened. Political loyalties fractured during the collapse of fascism and the Great German Retreat. And in the fragile years after the war, the world looked closely at Basilicata. It was during this period that Matera became a national symbol of poverty. Families were still living in cave dwellings known as Sassi, without electricity, without running water or sanitation, and with animals living in the same house. The University of Basilicata was founded in 1982 with campuses in Potenza. The university's focus includes engineering, agriculture, environmental science, and the humanities. It reflects a region looking forward while honoring its landscape and traditions. Today, Basilicata remains one of Italy's least densely populated regions. If Matera tells the story of rediscovery, Potenza tells the story of endurance. But before we walk Potenza, let's place it clearly on a map. Potenza sits in the region of Basilicata directly within the Apennines, part of the mountain chain that runs like a spine down the entire Italian peninsula. It rises more than 800 meters above sea level, making it the highest regional capital in Italy. The fact that the city's at that elevation changes the feeling of the South. Winters are colder, snow is common, the air is sharper. Geographically, Potenza sits almost centrally within southern Italy, about 130 kilometers or 80 miles from Bari on the Adriatic coast, and about 160 kilometers or 99 miles from Naples on the Tyrrhenian Sea. It lies between two seas, yet belongs to neither, and that inland position explains much of its history. Potenza is not a port shaped by trade or maritime wealth. It's a ridge city shaped by elevation and endurance. Valleys fall away steeply on either side. Mountains roll outward in layered waves. The Apennines protect it, but they also isolate it. Infrastructure arrived slowly. Modernization came cautiously. When you stand in Potenza and look across the Lucanian landscape, you understand that this is southern Italy's backbone rather than its stage. And when you begin to understand Potenza's economy, the city makes more sense. This is not an industrial capital like Milan. It's not a port driven by maritime trade like Bari or Naples. It's primarily administrative. It's the heart of Basilicata. Many of its residents work in public offices, education, healthcare, and regional institutions. The presence of the University of Basilicata reinforces that identity. Students move between campuses in Potenza and Matera. Industry does exist within the broader province, particularly near Melfi, where automotive manufacturing provides employment, and agriculture defines much of the surrounding countryside with wheat, olives, grapes, and sheep farming. But Potenza itself feels service-oriented, governmental, and steady. It's a capital built to support its region. Potenza was not randomly selected as Basilicata's capital, nor was it chosen simply because it sits centrally within the region. Its status is rooted in history. Under the Kingdom of Naples and later during the Bourbon rule, Potenza already functioned as an important administrative center for the region. It was inland, defensible, and positioned along the mountain routes that connected surrounding territories. When Italy unified in 1861, Potenza was confirmed as the capital of Basilicata largely because the government framework was already there. Offices, courts, and administrative structures were established. It had continuity. Matera may be older and more visually dramatic, but Potenza had the political infrastructure. In many ways, the choice reflects Basilicata itself. Practical, strategic, grounded in endurance. Next, we'll walk through the streets of Potenza, its cathedral, and look at the views across the Apennines as we begin to understand how this high and quiet capital anchors one of Italy's most resilient regions. When you arrive, at first it feels modern, functional, a working city, government buildings, residential blocks, climbing steep inclines. But when you start to walk, Potenza changes. Because it's a ridge city, everything rises and slopes. The historic center stretches along a narrow spine, and as you move upward, the views begin to open. Mountains roll outward in soft layers. The air is cooler, thinner. We begin at the heart of the historic center in the Piazza Duomo. The cathedral, dedicated to San Gerardo, anchors the old town. It stands quietly, not monumental in the way of Florence or Naples, but it's steady. The facade reflects centuries of rebuilding. Potenza has endured multiple earthquakes, and the cathedral has been restored more than once. Inside, the atmosphere is calm. Pale light filters through. You sense resilience more than grandeur. San Gerardo, the city's patron saint, was a 12th century bishop known for his pastoral care and defense of the city. His feast day in late May still draws processions through the streets. Even in a region shaped by hardship, devotion remains central. The Catholic faith here is not ornamental, it's lived. Step back outside and walk along the Via Praetoria, the main artery of the historic center. It runs along the ridge like a backbone. Cafes spill into small piazzas. Locals pause mid-walk to talk. It's not a tourist promenade, it's daily life. As you continue, small churches appear unexpectedly. Medieval fragments surface between newer structures. Earthquakes over the centuries reshaped much of the original architecture, so Potenza does not feel frozen in time. Because Potenza climbs steeply, the city has installed one of the largest public escalator systems in Europe. It's practical, yes, but it's also symbolic. A modern solution layered into an ancient ridge town. Old stone and moving steel. From certain viewpoints, you see how the city hugs the mountain. It does not dominate the landscape, it conforms to it. Potenza has endured significant earthquakes, particularly in the 19th and 20th centuries. Being based in the Apennines, the region is a seismic zone. Reconstruction is part of its story. Unlike cities rebuilt in grand architectural style, Potenza rebuilds functionally, practically. Next, let's talk about Potenza's most important festivals, the first one being, of course, the Feast of San Gerardo, Gerardo La Porta. San Gerardo, as you know, was the bishop of Potenza in the 12th century, and he is remembered as a shepherd of his people, a protector of the poor, a defender of the city. His feast day takes place on May 29th, but celebrations stretch across multiple days before. A historic parade known as the Parata dei Turchi moves through the streets. The name recalls medieval tensions and symbolic defense of the city against the Turks, the Muslims. Costumes participants in historical dress walk through the historic center, reenacting episodes tied to local tradition and identity. There are lights strung across Via Praetoria. Bands play and walk along the street. Families gather, and then comes the religious heart of the celebration, the procession of the saint. The statue of San Gerardo is carried through Potenza's streets. Devotion feels intimate. It belongs to the people who live here. Like much of southern Italy, Holy Week in Potenza is deeply observed. Processions move quietly through the historic center. Statues of Christ and the Virgin Mary are carried through narrow streets. The pace is slow and reflective, as it remembers Christ's crucifixion. In mountain towns like Potenza, the atmosphere of Holy Week is intensified. The silence, the narrow streets, everything a part of the solemnity. It's not internationally famous, like the Settimana Santa in Spain, or even the Sicilian Holy Week traditions, but it is authentic and it is powerful. As far as experiences in Potenza, one of the best experiences is simply walking along the Via Praetoria in the late afternoon. The sun lowers behind the mountains, the air cools quickly, and you begin to understand why this capital feels so different than most of Italy. The views from the ridge are expansive, and you're reminded constantly that you're high above the valleys. There's also a specialty in Basilicata's cuisine. In Potenza, you find dishes rooted in shepherding and mountain agriculture. Lamb is featured prominently. Pasta is often handmade and thick. Peppers, especially the famous locally dry cruci peppers, add flavor and crunch. Bread here is substantial and rustic. Meals feel grounded. Sitting in a trattoria in Potenza is intimate. Less tourism than noise, you're eating among the locals. Potenza is a great base for day trips. From here you can reach Matera and its cinematic Sassi, Maratea and the Tyrrhenian coast, Metaponto and its Greek ruins. Before we talk about day trips, we need to talk about logistics. Basilicata is connected by train, but not the way northern Italy is. Rail service exists, particularly between Potenza and larger hubs like Naples and Bari, but the network is limited, slower, and some areas it's indirect, which means you need to go south to catch a train to go north. Some towns require bus connections after the train. Others are simply far easier by car. So if you want to explore Basilicata, renting a car is strongly recommended. That's how we got around Basilicata, and I will tell you that Google Maps provides good instructions. Even if you can't read the signs, you can still get around. The region is shaped by ridges and valleys, and trains do not always follow the contours easily. Driving gives you some freedom. Our first stop will be Matera. If you're staying in Potenza, this is the most powerful day trip, unquestionably. The drive is roughly 100 kilometers, about 60 miles. It takes about an hour and a half by car through mountainous interior roads. From Bari, Matera is much closer, about 65 kilometers or 40 miles, and it takes about an hour by car, which is why many visitors pair this with Puglia, which we covered in our last two episodes. But Matera belongs historically and emotionally to Basilicata, and when you arrive, you'll understand why. The ancient city of stone, Matera is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. Its defining feature is the Sassi, entire districts carved directly into the limestone rock. These are not decorative caves, they were homes. Families lived here with their animals for centuries. Water was collected in cisterns. Life was vertical and communal. The city's origins stretch back to a prehistoric settlement. Later came the Greek influence, then Roman control, then Byzantine monks who carved Rupestrian churches directly into the rock. Walking through Matera feels like descending through layers of time. Stone steps twist unexpectedly. Churches appear carved into cliff faces. Homes open into caves that glow golden at sunset. And yet this beauty hides a difficult chapter. The shame of Italy. By the mid-20th century, conditions of the Sassi had deteriorated severely. There was no electricity, no plumbing, no sanitation. Multiple families sometimes lived in one cave dwelling. In the late 1940s, political leaders and journalists exposed the conditions. Matera was labeled La Vergogna d'Italia, the shame of Italy. In the 1950s, the government forcibly relocated thousands of residents to newly constructed housing to get them out of the caves. The Sassi were condemned and abandoned, and also taken away from families. For a time, they sat empty, but history rarely ends in humiliation. Beginning in the 1980s, restoration efforts began. Artists, preservationists, and former residents returned. The caves were stabilized. Infrastructure was added discreetly. In 1993, Matera became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and today something remarkable is happening. Families whose ancestors were forcibly removed in the 50s are fighting to reclaim their cave homes. Some have succeeded. Others are engaged in long legal and cultural negotiations about heritage rights. Sassi are no longer symbols of shame. They're symbols of resilience. We visited Matera in May with some Italian friends, Michele, Georgia, and their teenagers, Federica and Lorenzo. They brought their small dog, Margot. That was optimistic because Matera is absolutely vertical. Staircases cascade endlessly. Ramps connect terraces. Stone steps descend into ravines, then climb again. You're constantly moving down into the Sassi, up toward a viewpoint, across a terrace, then more stairs, back up again. At some point, Georgia ended up carrying Margot almost everywhere because the stairs were simply too much for her. And honestly, they were for us too. We were in hiking shoes. Meanwhile, one of my favorite Italian television characters runs up and down these same staircases in high heels through every episode. That would be Ima Tattarani, sostituto procuratore from the TV show Ima Tattarani. You might not have heard of Ima Tattarani, but Ima is fiercely intelligent, blunt, no-nonsense public prosecutor, and that TV show is based in Matera. And that's actually how I came to know Matera before we visited. The show is filmed throughout the Sassi and in the newer part of town, and the city is an absolute character in its own right on the show. Ima is constantly striding up and down these staircases in heels, and when we visited, I organized a private tour in Italian with a local guide, focused specifically on filming locations from this series and also other productions. Matera has twice stepped into the global stage through film. In 2004, director Mel Gibson released The Passion of Christ, a powerful portrayal of the final hours of Jesus. He needed a setting that felt like first-century Jerusalem, raw, ancient, and unpolished. Matera required no alteration. The Sassi became biblical streets. The ravine became Jerusalem's outskirts. When you walk there, you understand why. It already looks sacred. Years later, Matera appeared again in No Time to Die, the James Bond film starring Daniel Craig. The movie opens with dramatic chase scenes racing through the Sassi, motorcycles leaping across steps, cars speeding through narrow stone alleys. Watching it after visiting is surreal. You recognize the staircases, the curves, the rooftops. On screen, it moves at high speed. In reality, you climb slowly, and you feel every step. During our tour, we stood in piazzas where dramatic confrontations unfolded, but we also visited the cathedral, the Duomo di Matera, perched high above the Sassi and built in the 13th century in an Apulian Romanesque style. From its terrace, the view stretches across the Sasso Cavesco and the Sasso Barisano. It gives you orientation and reminds you that Matera is not only caves, it's also a structured medieval town. We also walked through the newer part of Matera, built after the 1950s relocation, where families were moved when the Sassi were emptied. Wider streets, apartment buildings, a different rhythm. It adds context, and it reminds you that Matera's story did not freeze in stone. It continued. At the end of the day, we were worn out, even though Ima makes it look effortless. Matera demands energy and attention, but it gives you back beauty in layers, cinematic, spiritual, historical. When the sun begins to lower and the Sassi grow gold against the ravine, you understand why filmmakers come here, and you climb anyway. Matera has a very important festival that I want to share with you. Held annually on July 2nd, the Festa della Madonna della Bruna is Matera's most important celebration. The tradition dates back to at least the 14th century and centers on the Madonna della Bruna, the city's patroness and protector. She is the Virgin Mary under a local title that has been venerated in Matera for centuries. Madonna means Our Lady, and della Bruna is believed to refer to a darker-toned Marian image or to an ancient term that evolved through local dialect. What matters is not the exact origin of the name, but that she's Matera's protector. For generations, the people of the city have turned to her in times of famine, plague, poverty, and uncertainty. The Catholic devotion to Madonna is woven into the identity of Matera itself. There's also a legend that shapes the festival. According to tradition, a peasant farmer once encountered a mysterious woman outside the city gates. She asked him to carry her into Matera on his cart. When they arrived, she asked that her message be proclaimed. But upon reaching the city, she vanished, leaving behind the image of the Virgin Mary. In excitement and fervor, the people destroyed the cart, and the destruction became a ritual. I have seen this festival. From the early morning, Matera hums with anticipation. Church bells echo against the Sassi, and the processions begin. The Madonna is carried through the streets with reverence, accompanied by clergy, musicians, and families who have honored her for generations. But as the day unfolds, something shifts. The sacred and communal begin to merge in a spectacle. The heart of the celebration is called the Carro Trionfale, the triumphal float. It's not an improvised structure. It's not a casual decoration. Artisans work on this float for an entire year. Every arch, every sculptural angel, every ornament detail is constructed in an elaborate papier-mâché. The design changes annually, and unveiling it is a matter of deep civic pride. For the people of Matera, the float represents artistry, devotion, and identity. The moment when it emerges, illuminated and adorned, is breathtaking. The Madonna is placed upon it, and the procession moves through the city. Crowds line the streets. Children sit on shoulders. Applause erupts as it passes through ancient stone courtyards that have witnessed centuries of this devotion. As night falls, the atmosphere intensifies. The Sassi glow under artificial lights. Fireworks begin to burst above the ravine. The float returns to the piazza. And then comes the moment everyone has been waiting for. It's called Lo Strazzo. In a tradition unique to Matera, I've never seen anything like it anywhere else. The crowd surges forward and tears the float apart. Hands reach upward, grabbing papier-mâché, arches crumble, decorative panels are ripped to shreds. It's completely chaotic. I would never try and get in the middle of it. It's totally intense, and it's a ritual. Taking a fragment home is believed to bring a blessing and protection for the year end, and the way the youngsters go after the float, you believe it works. The float took an entire year to build, and it is dismantled in like 90 seconds. Creation, celebration, destruction, renewal. Standing there at night, fireworks exploding above the ancient stone, while the crowd surges around you, you understand something essential about Matera. This city has known abandonment, it's known humiliation, and it's known rebirth. The Madonna della Bruna festival mirrors Matera's own story. The float is destroyed, but the devotion remains, and the next morning the people begin thinking about next year's float. After climbing through the Sassi, you'll want something grounding for lunch. A wonderful traditional option is Trattoria del Caveoso, Located within the Sassi district, it serves traditional Lucanian cuisine, orecchietti with cruci peppers, lamb slow cooked with herbs, thick rustic bread, and local wine. This is the kind of lunch where you sit longer than planned. One other festival I want to mention in Matera is the Living Nativity, the Presepe Vivente. I've also seen this, and it takes place in December. Matera hosts one of Italy's most extraordinary living nativities. The Sassi become Bethlehem. Actors in period costumes fill the cave dwellings. Torches flicker, choirs sing, shepherds move through stone alleys. It's immersive in a way few nativity scenes can be, because you're not looking at a set. You're looking at ancient caves and animals and biblical landscapes. Matera doesn't have to pretend to be ancient Jerusalem because it actually feels like it. When you leave Matera at sunset, the caves glow amber and the ravine deepens into shadow, and you understand something essential about Basilicata. Our next day trip is Metaponto. If you want to step back before Rome, before the Normans, before medieval kingdoms, you drive southeast from Potenza toward the Ionian coast and arrive at Metaponto. It's about 100 kilometers or 60 miles. The drive time is about an hour and 40 minutes. The land flattens into fertile plains. The air softens. You're no longer in mountain country. You're in Greater Greece. Metaponto was founded in the 7th century BC. As one of the most important Greek colonies in southern Italy. The Greeks chose this site deliberately. The soil was rich, wheat fields stretched across the plain. The Ionian Sea offered maritime access. The layout of the city followed structured urban planning, ordered streets, sanctuaries, and civic spaces. This was not a minor outpost. It was prosperous and intellectually alive. The philosopher Pythagoras is believed to have spent his final years here, and for a time Metaponto was associated with philosophical schools and agricultural wealth. When Rome absorbed the region, Metaponto continued its agricultural center. But its golden Greek era, the centuries when Hellenic culture shaped agriculture, governance, and daily life, still define it. The most iconic site is the Tavole Palatine, the Temple of Hera. Standing columns rise dramatically from open countryside. There's something deeply moving about seeing Greek architecture isolated among modern fields. No dense urban skyline, no crowds, just stone against the sky. Nearby, the Parco Archeologico reveals the foundations of the ancient city. You trace the grid streets. You can stand where sanctuaries once stood. It allows you to visualize the Greek colony and how it functioned more than 2,500 years ago. The National Archaeological Museum adds a human layer. Pottery, tools, fragments of daily life. It's small but powerful. It gives voice to the people who once walked the plains. And then there's the sea. Metaponto's beach stretches long and wide along the Ionian coast. It's calmer here than the Amalfi coast. The sand is broad, the horizon feels open. It offers a quiet coastal counterpoint to the mountainous interior of Basilicata. After exploring the ruins under the sun, a traditional stop for lunch is the Trattoria La Barchetta. Here, seafood meets tradition. Handmade pasta, local olive oil, and local wine from inland volcanic slopes remind you that Basilicata's agriculture continues to shape its cuisine. Metaponto's most important annual celebration centers on San Leone, honored in April. San Leone is believed to have been an early Christian bishop connected to the region. He's long been venerated along the coastal plain. The devotion stretches back centuries, rooted in medieval parish life that followed the collapse of classical antiquity. During the Feast of San Leone, the town gathers for religious processions. Mass and communal celebrations blend sacred ritual with coastal identity. Statues are carried through the streets that once followed Greek foundations. Families gather, music fills the air. Our next trip will be to the town of Melfi. If Metaponto gives you ancient Greece, then driving north from Potenza near Melfi gives you medieval power. Melfi is about 55 kilometers or 34 miles from Potenza. The drive time is about an hour. There is regional rail service, but travel time can approach an hour and 30 minutes depending on connections. As you drive, the road curves upward toward Monte Vulture, an extinct volcano that dominates this part of Basilicata. Vineyards stretch across the slopes. The air cools and the terrain feels strategic. And then you see it, Melfi's castle, massive, defensive, and commanding. Melfi was already settled in Roman times, but its defining chapter begins in the 11th century when the Normans arrived in southern Italy. Robert Guiscard and the Hauteville family established Melfi as one of their principal strongholds. From here, they consolidated control over much of southern Italy. For a period, Melfi was a sort of capital. In the 13th century, under the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, Melfi rose to even greater prominence. It was here in 1231 that Frederick promulgated the Constitutions of Melfi, a sweeping legal code that reorganized governance across the Kingdom of Sicily. The code strengthened royal authority, centralized administration, and reduced feudal fragmentation. In this quiet hill town of Basilicata, one of medieval Europe's most sophisticated legal reforms was issued. The Castello di Melfi dominates the skyline. Its towers and walls reflect layers of Norman, Swabian, Angevin, and Aragonese modifications. Today it houses the National Archaeological Museum, which adds prehistoric and Roman depth to the visit. But the power of the castle is still its position. Standing atop the ramparts, you see why this was chosen as a stronghold. The surrounding valleys unfold in every direction. Control was visible. Below the castle, the Cathedral of Santa Maria Assunta anchors the town. Originally built in the Norman period and rebuilt after the earthquakes, it reflects the resilience of the region. Its bell tower rises over its historic center, reminding you that faith and governance often walked side by side. Walking through Melfi's old town feels quieter than one might expect for such a historically significant place. Stone streets curve gently, views open unexpectedly between the buildings. It's dignified. And just beyond Melfi lies Monte Vulture, the extinct volcanic massive that shapes the area's agriculture. This mineral-rich soil produces the Aglianico del Vulture, one of southern Italy's most respected red wines. The volcanic presence adds geological drama to the historical narrative. After exploring the castle walls and medieval streets, a refined but regionally rooted lunch can be found at Ristorante Novecento. Here you'll find lamb dishes, handmade pasta, and the powerful Aglianico wines born from volcanic soil. It's the kind of meal that feels grounded and serious, much like the town itself. But Melfi is not frozen in medieval glory. It also lives through tradition. One of the most important annual celebrations honors Sant'Alessandro, its patron saint. Sant'Alessandro is believed to have been an early Christian martyr, and the devotion to him in Melfi stretches back for centuries. His feast is celebrated each May with religious processions that move through the streets beneath the looming castle. The statue of the saint is carried through town, accompanied by prayer, music, and gatherings. It's a reminder that Melfi's story is not only imperial and political, it's also spiritual. And that combination, law, empire, faith, and volcanic land, makes Melfi one of the most historically significant towns in Basilicata. The next town we'll visit is Venosa. It's about 65 kilometers or 40 miles from Potenza, about an hour and 10 minutes. There is a train option, but it's limited and indirect. Car is significantly more practical. North of Potenza, not far from Melfi, lies Venosa, a town that feels smaller, quieter, and deeply layered. If Melfi represents medieval power, Venosa reaches further back. In Roman times, it was known as Venusa, a significant colony founded in 291 after Rome consolidated control over the region. Its location was strategic, along an important inland route linking the Adriatic to the Tyrrhenian. But Venosa's most famous son is the poet Horace, born here in 65 BC. Quintius Horatius Falucius would later become one of Rome's greatest lyrical poets, but his origins were here, in a provincial colony on the edge of the empire. Walking through Venosa today, you feel the Roman layer immediately. The archaeological park reveals the remnants of ancient baths, mosaics, amphitheater structures, and fragments of paved streets. The scale is not overwhelming, but it's intimate. You can imagine daily life unfolding here. Merchants, soldiers, citizens, navigating a structured Roman grid. Then as you turn the corner, you encounter something extraordinary. The Abbey of the Santissima Trinita. This monumental complex reflects both Roman foundations and Norman ambition. The Normans chose Venosa as a burial site for members of the Hauteville family. The abbey itself is partially unfinished, a soaring Romanesque structure that feels suspended between ruin and completion. Arches rise open to the sky, stone walls frame an empty space. It's one of the most evocative religious sites in Basilicata. The layering here is profound. Roman colony, early Christian community, Norman burial ground. Venosa feels contemplative. In the historic center, narrow streets wind quietly past stone facades. After exploring the abbey and Roman park, a wonderful stop for lunch is the Ristorante Caliche. Here you can taste local wines grown on nearby volcanic slopes paired with regional dishes, handmade pasta, and rustic breads that speak to Basilicata's agricultural roots. And like so many towns in southern Italy, Venosa expresses its identity through its patron saint. The most important annual celebration is the Feast of San Rocco, held every August. Devoted to San Rocco, a 14th century pilgrim and saint associated with the protection from plague. In Venosa, the tradition stretches back for centuries. Processions through the historic streets, statues carried with reverence, accompanied by music, fireworks, and gatherings. There are two other experiences I want to mention in Basilicata. The first one is the Dolomiti Lucane. These are not the Dolomites of the north. They're smaller in scale, jagged rock formations that rise sharply from the landscape almost unexpectedly. Two medieval villages cling to the peaks, Castel Mezzano and Pietra Pertosa. The houses are carved into the rock. Stone staircases weave upward. The mountains feel close enough to touch. And between the two villages runs one of Basilicata's most thrilling experiences, Il Volo dell'Angelo, the flight of the angel. You're harnessed and suspended along a steel cable that stretches above the valley floor. You launch from one village and glide to the other, suspended between cliffs. It's exhilarating, and it's not a casual attraction. It requires advanced booking, particularly in peak months between late spring and early autumn. Tickets are usually purchased online through the official Volo dell'Angelo website, which I will put in my blog. I always have an associated blog for each episode at caterinaferrara.com/blog. You reserve a time slot, check weather requirements, and arrive early for safety instructions. It operates seasonally, usually from May through October, weather permitting. Even if you chose not to do the zip line, the villages are worth the drive. Hiking trails connect viewpoints across the peaks. The Path of the Seven Stones links Castel Mezzano and Pietra Pertosa for those who prefer hiking to flying. Standing on the ridges, looking across the landscape, you understand that Basilicata is not flat, not coastal, it's everything. Another experience is the Aglianico wine experience. North of Potenza rises Monte Vulture. The vineyards surrounding Monte Vulture are small, family-run, and deeply tied to the land. Visiting here feels different from visiting a winery in Tuscany. It's less polished, more intimate. You taste wine in stone cellars or modest tasting rooms overlooking vines that stretch toward volcanic slopes. Many wineries require advanced reservations, particularly outside of season. Tastings are usually booked directly through the winery websites or by email. Some offer guided tours to the vineyards and cellars, followed by tastings with local cheese and bread. Prices are generally modest compared to anything you pay in northern Italy. You can pair this wine with lamb, aged pecorino, or pepperone crusco, and you'll taste Basilicata in a glass. The experience adds another dimension to the region. Basilicata is not only caves and castles, it's agriculture shaped by geology. Basilicata is not loud, and it does not compete for attention. Here you walk through caves once called the shame of Italy that are now a UNESCO World Heritage. You climb staircases that became ancient Jerusalem and stand beneath Norman castles where medieval law reshaped kingdoms. You taste wine grown from volcanic soil. You watch a papier-mâché float built for a year be torn apart in minutes, and you understand renewal is sacred here. Potenza may not dazzle like Rome or Florence, but it anchors a region defined by resilience and quiet strength. Basilicata reminds us that Italy is not only spectacle, it's stone, silence, endurance, and rebirth. I'm Caterina Ferrara, and this is Immersion Travel Italy. Thank you for joining me for episode 17 of 20 in our Regional Capitals of Italy series. Next Friday, we'll continue to move south. We'll head into Calabria, the toe of the boot, and the capital, Catanzaro. This region is often overlooked, yet filled with dramatic coastlines, mountain ranges that cut through like a spine, layered Greek and Byzantine history, and some of the most extraordinary ancient remains in Italy. If you enjoyed this journey, moving region by region, be sure to follow the Immersion Travel Italy podcast. Each of my episodes has an associated blog on my blog page at caterinaferrara.com, and be sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter. See you next Friday. Until then, travel slowly, travel deeply, and let the cities tell their stories.